I work for a local radio station as the night DJ. It suits me down to the ground, as I've always been a night owl, rather than a morning person. One of my favorite parts about the job, despite having done this now for well over 10 years, are the listener call-in sessions. Considering I broadcast through the night, when the vast majority of regular people are fast asleep, you'd be surprised by the steady growth we've seen, not only of listeners, but interaction too. Not just people who have forgotten to turn off their radio once they've fallen asleep. I guess with the number of people working shifts these days, it sort of makes sense. The call-ins though, wow. We always talk about all kinds of stuff, but the thing that always gets me, the switchboard lit up, so to speak, is like when I ask about a spooky story. Who's got one? They range from rehash of old tales to weird and wonderful, every so often and downright terrifying. Being a Brit, most of the stories tend to be ghost-related. Maybe that is just what we do best. But a few weeks ago, I received one of the most frightening and yet interesting tales of my entire career. The person calling wished to remain anonymous, but said that they had Native American heritage. They were British. Their mother was of Native American descent and had been over here studying when she'd met her father, a Brit. Although they chose to live and raise a family here in the U.K., their mother had included a lot of her culture into their upbringing. Stories and traditions and legends, dating back centuries of her own people. One of the stories that she had relayed to them was about those that are called SKINWALKERs. Being a Brit, although they embraced their mother's heritage, because they were literally the only child in their school and community with any sort of links to America, they were simply just stories. Stories which were fascinating by their own right, but didn't seem anywhere near as real as they might have done when they actually lived in the U.S. That changed. This kid was 17, and for the first time, they had to be left alone. Their parents had to head off to some charity convention, and it would finish too late to drive home. A quick note. These parents were overly conservative, to the point to where they wouldn't leave their teenager home alone. Even at 17, it was a bit of a stretch for them. While I understand nowadays most are left home at 12 years old, if not younger, some people don't exactly have that luxury. They were a good kid after all. Never been in trouble, and there were no wild parties. They didn't have any friends around or any booze to raid. They simply did their homework, hung out, and went to bed. Oh, and the other reason their mom and dad were happy to leave, there was a Cloudy. Cloudy was their golden retriever, crossed with a husky fur baby, and Cloudy thought she was second mother to my caller. Worshipped them, and their parents knew they'd be safe with their protector. So, when Cloudy began growling at around 3 a.m, she was sleeping on their bed. They began to get an odd feeling, just as they were trying to work out if they were dreaming or not. You know, that fuzzy state you're in when you're suddenly awoken from a deep sleep. Cloudy launched off the bed and positioned herself in front of the window again, growling, heckles up, teeth bared. And then, they heard why. There was a scratching from outside, sounding like just below their window. They could hear the words, "Let me in," followed by their name. Oh, and just to add to what must have already seemed like their worst nightmare, it was their mother's voice calling. Their mother who had called just a few hours prior and was already miles away. Somehow, they managed to work up the courage to look out of the window. I'm not sure I would have been that brave. And I have to tell you, as they recounted this part to me, I had shivers running down my spine. Cloudy had begun going nuts, barking and growling, and trying to throw herself at the window. All the while, they could clearly hear their mom's voice over and over, the same saying over, "Let me in." And when they looked out their window, there was indeed something down below. Something they could just make out in the moonlight. A dog, or to be more clear, something that resembled a dog, except it stood up, proportions all messed up. That, and the fact that it was able to mimic voices, alerted them to exactly what was outside. What they believed to be a skinwalker. They told me that they knew all about them from their mother, and the most important thing, other than quite obviously not letting them in, was to never make eye contact or speak of them directly. If you did happen to look directly at one, that was how they could directly take over you, and how they could use you, mimic you, copy you. They were never entirely sure how this particular one ended up in the British Gardens, but when their parents came back the next day, their mom performed some traditional rituals, and since then, they haven't seen or heard anything again from these creatures, while there are no medicine men nearby that their mothers couldn't utilize. She had made sure that she had learned the correct rituals to rid them of this problem. Pretty scary, right? I always thought that things like this were attached to a location, but maybe they're more attached to a person or culture. I guess sometimes we'll just never really know. I live in part of the States where there are plenty of places that used to belong to the natives, and it's rife with stories and sightings of all sorts of things that their legends and traditions hold. Until recently, I treated those tales and stories with the same interest, yet disbelief as any regular ghost story, or even supposed UFO sighting. I find them fun, but I don't believe it. It was always a lot easier that way too. Because for me at least, if you don't believe, it's not real. And if it's not real, there's no need to be afraid. I like to keep fit, so being healthy in my body and mind is very important. But my body sometimes has other plans, such as a knee injury, which meant I wasn't supposed to go running on it for a while. I could, however, and was encouraged to, take long leisurely walks, and luckily for me, the place where I lived was littered with thick woodland and trails for walking. I'd wake up and put something on my phone like YouTube, put my earbuds in, and off I would go, sometimes doing 2 or 3 hour walks at a time. And it was actually on one of these early morning walks, I guess around 6 in the morning, when I saw something I can't describe. Because of the early morning hour, I like to get these walks in as much as possible before I come home and start work. I don't tend to see too much other folk. The occasional early dog walker, or even more rare, another jogger. Usually it's just me and the birds, and that's fine. But on this particular morning, I could clearly make out a shape in front of me. Now, I say clearly, and then shape. So let me clarify what I mean. I could see there was something not too far ahead of me, that it was rather large and moving. But we were well into fall at this point, and it was still fairly dark out since it was around 6 in the morning. Although I could see a shape, I couldn't exactly tell who or what it was. And the most odd at first, and then, the more I thought about it, quite frankly, the more terrifying about the shape was, and that it kept changing. Now, I know you're probably thinking that it wasn't changing, but as the sun was rising, it was becoming less in shadow, something like that. If you think that it just becomes a normal person or animal taking a stroll, just like me. But it absolutely had nothing to do with the sun or shadows. It's been a while since I messed about with my light, making shadow puppets, but I was 100% sure that it simply was impossible to make something turn from the size of a large dog, to a bear, to a person, and back and forth over and over. And you know what? Once my mind accepted what I was seeing, I turned back and ran. Need be damned, I'd pay for that later. but I'd rather suffer with a messed up knee than stay there any longer. I honestly have no idea what that thing was doing there, but it just oozed evil and wrong, and I will not be going back on that particular trail again, even when my damn knee is better. And that's not the worst of it, because now, I can't stop thinking about what else might be out there. Did I see a skinwalker? Are skinwalkers real? And if they are real, what else is real? Does that mean everything in legends is actually real? I come from a family of hunters. My granddad says our ancestors were trappers back in the day, and we come from a long line of people who supposedly were just born for it. We've traveled all over the states to hunt different things, and have managed to tick most stuff off the list. But there was one creature that remained unticked off the list. And as surprising as it might be, doesn't mean it's not a hard animal to kill. An elk. Granddad hadn't managed one, and neither had Dad, and it was looking like his hunting days were at an end now, since his eyesight had gotten really bad, and even Mom had forbade him from using his gun, in case he shot himself. For whatever reason, my granddad and Dad only stuck to hunting bear and deer. Nothing really else. I mean, a few things here and there, but why they never tackled elk, I'm not so sure. It was up to me to tick elk off that list, and I had the perfect plan. I'd met with some like-minded friends, and we just so happened to have an old wooden lodge in the same spot of the woods where there were plenty of elk. After heading up there, going through a hell of a drive, I didn't tell anybody where I was going. I wanted it to be a surprise. Everything is as my buddy had said. I'd make myself comfortable when I got there, ready to head off very early the next morning. There was a light dusting of snow, but I was prepped for that, and had brought thick, warm outdoor clothing. Anybody who hunts know you have to layer up in order not to freeze your buns off. Waking up the next morning, full of adrenaline and determination, I was going to make sure our family got that thick bag of elk. I dressed warmly and off I went, crunching through the snow, and was so excited to see elk tracks. I got myself in position, and luckily, my buddy already had a makeshift hide up there. And then I saw it. An absolute beast. It was massive. Hell of a lot bigger than anything I was expecting. It was facing away from me, and for some reason, I had the shot but I didn't take it. Part of me wanted to look at it more, look at it in the eye, so if it couldn't see me, somehow, it would know who was the boss, who was always around. I waited, and then it turned. Now, I have killed many things. Obviously not elk, but other animals. My finger should have just been ready to pull that trigger, no matter what. But I froze up. Whatever in God's name that thing was in front of me, it wasn't a regular elk. It was already unusually large, and this wasn't the first time seeing an elk in the wild. When it turned, I saw its face. It looked distorted. I don't know how to describe it, but wrong. Its eyes looked different too, and it looked me right into my eyes, and I felt this ominous feeling. It's really hard to describe. Its face is what will always haunt me. It made me just kind of want to walk off, and after that, I just gave up and left it be. I know there's really not much to my story, and that it might be kind of lame, but there's just something I can't quite put my finger on. I don't really believe in scary stories or Native American lore, but there was something different in these woods that day. Something I can't even begin to describe. Whatever it is, I feel like it shook my soul